Listen to the behind-the-scenes innovation happening at Clean Air Lawn Care. Here's an excerpt from a recent conference call with franchise owners and Clean Air HQ. They're developing Project Dirtnap, measuring carbon sequestration in properly maintained turf grass. Listen in.
So this is a concept I've been working on for a while with some researchers, a woman at CSU who's now at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and also our people and she focuses on climate change in particular. Also our people that put on the training, like Tony Koski, who's the turf specialist, and Scott Denning, who does the climate change stuff at Colorado State also, and then Addie Elliott, who's the soil scientist. So the concept is something that's pretty available now in agriculture and ranching, really focusing on how soils can sequester carbon with a lot of the research going on, particularly in the western United States. So Tony Koski is very familiar with this concept, been doing it for years, and I've also been talking to Scott Denning. What he did was point me in the direction of this paper by Zirkle, Lau, and Augustine that I referenced in this, that outlines the concept of using turf as a carbon sequestering resource. So, and when you start to break it down and look at the numbers, it becomes pretty significant. So jumping to the end, what Denning basically measured based on this paper was that a properly managed lawn could sequester an acre a year of turf, and that's a lot obviously, could sequester about 15% of an average American's carbon footprint. And so it's somewhere in between, changing out your light bulbs and riding your bike instead of your car in terms of its effectiveness. It's definitely worth mentioning. It's also not going to solve all the problems all by itself, but it does present a pretty interesting opportunity for all of us, I think. And so I think it's something for us to start to work into. What I want to do today is take you through it and then give you a chance to offer input about the direction of it. And then I'll start to basically just market it internally to our owners one at a time and gauge their interest and start to build data around the concept of citizen scientists, where our owners are the citizen scientists. And we can also broaden that out to, our customers too. There'll probably be customers interested, and we'll just kind of see where the concept goes. Chrisanne is working on a part of the cleanairlawncare.com website that will be gauged around this, a place where an owner can input information and researchers could come and visit and see the information. Other customers, other lawn care service providers, could come and see what we're doing. So it's open book for sure, the concept, and we're not trying to pretend like we're scientists. That's why we're calling ourselves citizen scientists and doing something that's basic data gathering. But I'll walk you through kind of the premise of it. You guys know the history of clean air. It was 10 years ago we set off to affect nation's air pollution, most of that 10 to 12% that's caused by small engines and mowers, trimmers, blowers in particular. So you guys are familiar with that story, and we made great headway there, and we have a lot more to do. But I think that this is a burgeoning idea, one where research is starting to follow it, and it can be very, very impactful for this positive climate change. So what we do with our mowing equipment is we use stuff that prevents additional pollution. What this would do is put carbon to rest, give it a dirt nap. And so I'll also say that some people have asked me, what does dirt nap mean? And so, it's kind of a slang, colloquial way of saying somebody's underground. They're taking the long nap, the permanent nap, the dirt nap. So, and that's the same concept we're talking about with carbon. We're trying to take it from the air, put it in the soil, and give it a long, long nap. So, getting back to this paper, what these guys looked at was if you look, a very, very poorly managed lawn is going to sequester carbon too. A very well-managed lawn can sequester about 4 times as much as a very poorly managed one. So that's what their findings are about. And so if you want to learn more about that, what I would do is just Google that paper and look more into it. It's very technical, and it's, you know, but there are some pieces that you could take away some valuable information from, maybe you would understand more about. But what I'm talking about doing is building on what they've done and taking it to a practical level with our practices, Clean Air's practices. My proposal is to do basically a before and after soil sample, and it's a microbial biomass soil sample basically. It's a one-time thing. You do it in July when the activity in the soil is peak, the temperature is there, and it's going to measure everything, everything from roots to microbial life to you know, all the different stuff in there. There's 3 main sources way carbon can get into the ground. It drips. It either gets, you know, more roots. That helps tremendously if the roots are bigger, which, you know, if we mow higher, the length of grass blades equal to, over time, the length of the roots. So if we mow higher, there's going to be more roots, there's going to be more carbon sequestered. The other is the roots actually drip carbon. As they go through that photosynthesis process, they drip carbon. And Chris could probably go into more detail on this, but as that carbon gets released into the soil, the microbial life basically starts to use it, and then it feeds on itself. And so that drip of carbon is something that our turf can do over time. And it's a lazy, easy way to take carbon from the air through photosynthesis into the soil. And then the third one is just the biodiversity factor going on in the soil. All the different things that are alive in there. And some of the stuff could be down, you know, 2 feet, things like worms, other organisms, and it's actually significant. And so those things live, they die, they store more carbon, they live, they die. It's a, you know, it continues to go. So there's a biodiversity factor to it also. And this is coming from Addie Elliott. She can explain a lot better. These are just based on my notes talking to her. But those are the 3 basic ways that that grass can move carbon from the air into the soil on a permanent level. And so what would change it from being, you know, back into the air would be things like tilling the soil. You know, if you turn that soil over, put in a new lawn, whatever, you know, you could potentially release a lot more of that carbon. For the most part, though, once it goes into the soil, it's going to stay there for quite a while. So my concept is to take a before and after. Let's go find the right group of customers, and then let's take a soil sample this July, and then let's use our practices, clean air practices, and then let's take another soil sample in year 3, so basically 2 years later. So it would be July of 2018, and just compare with this soil sample concept, what happened in terms of how much carbon is in there, and then start to, you know, make further, just see where we want to go with that information. Just basically starting to gather information, start to look at it in terms of carbon, what's going on in the soil. As we do that, I think we'll also create beautiful lawns. I think it'll have that effect too, but I think that as we understand more about what's going on in the soil, particularly as we affect it with our practices, I think it will be something real valuable long-term for us to use. And so over 5 years, we would just do three of these. So year 2, we'd find more new customers. We'd throw them into maybe a different type of test, but same basic concept. Take a soil sample before, take a soil sample after, and see how we do it. We would also be able to do this around the country. That's one of the things that these scientist types like about our situation, is we have already all of these different soils, different climates, different grass types that we have access to. So the thing we always have access to are these people coming from chemicals or gas or poor mowing techniques to our system. We have an influx of that, and so that's the main way to look at how to put that together. So, does anybody have questions right now?
Cal, Claire, one thing, are you thinking about recording other parameters about the lawns, for example, soil type, air temperature, average air temperature, precipitation, irrigation regime, fertilization regime, because we all do different things.
Mm-hmm.
And although we get some information from, say, an average carbon increase over all the lawns, it would be more informative if there would be some kind of a breakdown by these parameters.
Well, what do you think those parameters should be is something I agree with you. You know, I'd like it to be useful and impactful to lawn care, but also, like you said, it varies so much. So if you have ideas of what those parameters should be, you know, I'd be real interested in trying to work that into what the data that's gathered. But I think the basic stuff you're talking about, which is where are they located, what's their zip code, and then what's the grass type, which in turn, you know, where they're located kind of tells you what their soil type is. So the irrigation piece is really, that's where it starts to get really crazy, because there's just so many different ways to irrigate and weather and stuff like that. You know, we've talked about doing a national concept around water reduction needs and stuff like that. That's a real hot area too. But the problem with that is it's just the data is so random out there. You know, in terms of rainfall, the timing of the rainfall, and all of that sort of thing. So, and then we've also looked at trying to figure out the carbon footprint of water, and that really varies almost town to town. You know, one town will have a real low carbon footprint, and the next town over a real high one, because it's getting trucked across the mountains through some pipeline. So, but I do think the more basic variables we can add, the better, Claire.
Yeah. Another thing is that there's really no way of conducting a control. For example, we're not going to monitor a true green lawn for the 5 years or 3 years of the trial. So the best we can do is say, well, here's the carbon content of the lawn that we found.
Right.
And here's what happened to it in 3 years.
Yep. Yeah. We could put a requirement on there that they've had to have used a true green type service for a certain number of years.
And then, so we can't really say, well, if they'd gone ahead and used True Green for 3 years, they wouldn't have had this carbon increase. I mean, it's probable that they wouldn't, but we can't experimentally show it.
Yep. We could have True Green come and spray a tenth of their lawn, continue the service.
I bet they'd love to do that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. It's definitely an indirect conclusion. And maybe in some cases there isn't much of an impact, you know, or even a negative one too. I mean, we're obviously opening ourselves up to that. So, you know, the premise is that the paper that these guys put together is correct. I mean, intuitively it makes a lot of sense. And, you know, let's put some practical data to it and start to see patterns where, you know, if we adopt this technique over this in our lawn care, if we're building more biomass, we should be building healthier soils, and we should be, you know, delivering a better product to the customer. So, But Chris, I mean, working the customer into this is something I've looked at a lot, and the climate change woman in Nebraska is very interested in that. You know, there's a lot of appeal to that with kids and with just educational type stuff. The trick is, how do you get them to do a soil sample? You know, how do you get them involved? You know, a really successful citizen scientist project based out of CSU here has been just a basic water precipitation measuring concept. And so you basically just go put something outside. They provide a cup to you on a one-time basis that measures precipitation. It might measure some wind and some other things too. But it sits outside, and then you just report the data as that thing fills up, you know, and you log in and fill it and then report the data. And it's been very, very successful to the point where people are using the data from this project over, you know, weather.com or meteorology type data, because there's just so many more data points. It's a lot more broken down and accurate. And so, you know, how to involve our customer in this is something I'm really interested in. I just haven't figured out the whole mechanics of the soil sample, or maybe it's something different. I don't know. But what I'm assuming we would do in this situation is that the owner would go gather the soil sample, and then they would mail it into a central place like CSU or something, and then it would get processed, and then that data would go back to the owner, or it would get inputted into the website, centralized, that sort of thing. So my thought was to look for basically these three ways that we make the soil healthier and impact this carbon, which is, you know, we try to mow high, we use organics, and then we mulch. And all three of those things are criteria that help us improve a soil when we take it on. And so it would just be a simple before and after. We would look for customers during the spring that were new customers coming from this situation. They would fit the profile, and then we'd ask them if it was okay to be in the citizen scientist project, and then we would basically, they wouldn't have to do anything. You know, we would just do that soil sample and then come back 2 years later and do it again. I think it would provide a stickiness to the customer too. They'd see how invested you were in their property. But wanted to see what kind of thoughts you guys have about, is this criteria too narrow? Is it good? Is it, you know, should we look for other criteria or broaden it out? Or, you know, how many of these kind of customers do you see every spring?
Hey, it's Adam here. I think the thing you have to figure out too is if those customers are going to be with you in the next 3 or 5 or 7 years or whatever. So you're going to have to take a pretty large sample size of your customer. Well, large might not be the right word, but you're definitely going to have to do you know, multiple customers to make sure that if you want this data, that you're going to get customers that are still going to be with you in the future. So just something to think about, but I think there's a lot that I don't get a ton of customers that were True Green. I get a lot of customers that are just new and wanting to start something, so I get a few here and there, but not a ton that are switching over.
But yeah, and it doesn't have to be True Green. They just have to have been on a chemical treatment program. Well, do you think it matters if we do 10 a year or 2 a year or 20 a year of these?
I'd do the
Well,
most possible.
I think if you want to make sure that you're going to have, I think 10 is probably a safe number, and figure that you're going to have half of those that are still going to be with you in 3 years, I would think.
Well, the way I have it set up, it's actually 2 years. It's, it's just the middle of the third year you would, the first year you would take the sample, and then you'd skip a summer, and then the following summer you'd take the follow-up sample. So it's just 2 years. But they would be renewed in the third year. So I guess they would be a third-year customer. And that's kind of random. I just kind of picked that time frame to allow our techniques that take effect. I don't know if that is the right amount of time.
It might also be unnecessary to stipulate that they had to have a chemical regime. We just take customers as we get them and try to classify them by what's been done to the lawns before we got there. If there's a certain level of carbon, we're going to find a change in it according to our practices.
Yeah.
Maybe a smaller change if it's been better treated than not. But I don't know if we had to screen them for chemical regime. A lot of customers may not even know.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying we could have 3 criteria, but we could basically put them into 3 different groups, which is somebody that fulfills all 3, somebody that fulfills 1, or somebody that fulfills 2, and just see what happens with all 3 different groups.
Yeah, we could do that. I'm not even sure we could actually ask people to say, okay, for the last 3 years, have your clippings been mulched or not? I don't know if they'd even know. But we could try.
Yep.
Well, one thing I'd be curious about too regarding the type of soil sample would be, does this test indicate any trace amounts of petrochemical or traces of any sort of chemical products within the test itself? That would be curious.
Yeah.
I mean, just as far as the parameters go, I look at this not only as being a citizen scientist and getting involved with your with your client more on a family level or more on an environmental level, getting them involved with what we're doing. But I see a great opportunity for public relations, and getting some exposure via newspaper or otherwise.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, Chris. I think that this concept is, when you talk to somebody about it, and it's kind of hard to explain, but when they get it, the lights turn on, they go, wow, that's amazing. And it is exactly the sort of educational article that somebody's going to feature on the news in the daily newspaper or whatever. And so I think from a monetary standpoint, that's what we want to do there, is we want to, position the owner as a citizen scientist, the face to the PR, and, give them the opportunity to talk about what they're doing locally, or what as it relates to whoever they're talking to. Tell their story. And I think that that's where I see the big opportunity, is an educational piece, and will benefit financially by taking the high road with this.
The call went on discussing PR opportunities and next steps for Project Dirtnap. Interested in learning more or speaking with someone at Clean Air? Visit cleanairlawncare.com.